Hey, welcome to my channel. So today we're going to continue the verse-by-verse study of Romans. We're in Romans chapter 1, 18 to 23. And today I'll be addressing a very important topic, a very important question. How do we know God exists, right? And the question is important because it often leads to a second question of, what about if I've never heard the gospel, right? What about those people who've never heard the gospel? Will they be judged, right? Are they damned, right? And because people existed in Abram's time, right? There's people that exist in lands that the gospel will actually never reach, right? You know, the deep core of the Amazon, or deep Africa, places that people will never go to bring the gospel to people. So Romans 1 actually teaches about this issue. We'll explore this further in these passages, look for evidence of God, and then we'll try to understand how to answer this question. We'll look outside the Bible to modern science to help explain this. And the funny thing is that modern science is slowly moving toward the recognition that there is a creator, right? We're finding evidence in everything around us that makes us believe this is not a coincidence, right? This didn't just happen by accident. And of course, modern scientists can't say it's God, right? It's the Christian God, but they're starting to come around to the fact that through what we're starting to learn in science, this can't just possibly be all happenstance. And of course, the Bible offers its own evidence to answer this question, and we will be using the Bible. So what if you didn't have science or the Bible, right? Do all people really know there's God? What sort of guilt could a person have if they never heard the gospel, right? If they'd never been specifically exposed to it? And what does the scripture say about this, and how does it work out in real life? So verse 18 through 19. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people, who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. So in verse 17, we read that the righteousness of God was revealed through the gospel. And now in verses 18 and 19, we're reading that the wrath of God has already been revealed. It's already happened. God's wrath is revealed. Mankind has received the revelation that God has wrath, right? There's a God and he's angry, and it's a universal fact. And he's angry because of godlessness and wickedness, right? And this is important because these aren't just random words that Paul uses to take up space or be more descriptive. These are two very specific behaviors that God's wrath is revealed against. They're very specific: godlessness and wickedness. Godlessness is a life or an attitude that ignores God or doesn't give him the glory and the honor he deserves. It's simple. You're either not responding to God when you hear him, or you're ignoring him completely. And this connects to the idea that is carried on throughout the rest of Romans. People know there's a God. It's common sense that creation declares his existence. The next word is wickedness. So on one side, we have ignoring the existence of God, whether it's by ignoring or rejecting him. And on the other side, we see this exercised in wicked behavior, right? So this is the embracing of sin while deliberately ignoring moral truth. And the results of these behaviors are things that are slowly revealed as we read Romans. These results are what we as people and Christians are supposed to know and respond to. There is a God and there is moral truth. These two facts, creation and conscience, are what we are supposed to respond to as stated in Romans. So who suppress the truth by their wickedness, right? There's a sense in which the truth of God is just obvious through creation. It's obvious there's a God. To hold back or resist this requires you to push back or suppress this truth. The two truths that are being suppressed are the existence of God and who he is. So according to the rest of Romans 1, it's being suppressed through idolatry and the elevation of creation. Meaning that the Gentiles are giving full credit to creation for the existence of mankind. And the other truth they suppress is moral law, right? God's moral law. This is suppressed through sinning, which makes us calloused and hardened against those sins. And this allows us to continue those sins, and the sins grow and grow over time, getting worse and worse over time. And this is called moral degradation. So Romans 1 is an indictment against mankind, right? That's what Paul is telling us. We're getting the revelation of God's wrath. God is telling us that we are in serious trouble, right? Things are not okay. They are not okay. We know we're not okay. And that's what Romans 1 is saying. There's a solution to mankind not being okay. And the solution is the good news in the gospel. That's why we call it the good news, right? It's the good news because the wrath of God is already being revealed, but the gospel tells us how we can be saved from this wrath, right? That's why we have such good news to give, right? The sentence is out. We are condemned, but the Bible, the gospel, is our salvation to that condemnation. And that's a summary of verse 18. Now in verse 19, we get into details as Paul unpacks these ideas a little more. Since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them, right? God has shown them. The knowledge of God has been revealed to the people. Verse 20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood for what has been made, so that people are without excuse. So I like the poetic and interesting contrast between invisible qualities and clearly seen. I like how verse 19 starts off by saying, what may be known about God is plain to them, because this means that there are things about God that may be known, right? God is not unknowable. We're not agnostic in the sense that nobody knows or you can't know, right? And this certainly isn't the biblical perspective, right? You can know things about God. And this is a hugely important claim, right? Creation allows us to know some things about God, to learn by looking at the world around us some details about the maker of the world, right? We learn things about an artist through the art that he or she makes. We learn things about an author through the books that he or she writes. And the last part of the verse, God has made it plain to them, right? God shows us and teaches us that Christianity isn't blindly passed from one person to the next. You know, we just don't believe in God because someone told us to believe in God, because someone told them to believe in God, and they were told to believe in God by someone else, right? It's not something we're just indoctrinated into. The Bible is declaring that we're introduced or we're indoctrinated by the universe and not people, right? Life experience tells us there's a God. And this is what started initial belief in God. People looking around and declaring the obviousness of God's existence. And it gets even better than this because it gives us specific details about what we can know about God. Specifically, what we can know about God from creation, right? Creation can't tell us everything about God, and we can't know everything about God. No matter how much we read the Bible or strive to understand Scripture, we'll never know everything about God. Even after we die and are taken up into his presence to spend eternity with him, we'll still never know everything, right? Now, having said that, I'm more interested in what I can know because that's what I'll be held accountable for. So what do we know about God? Specifically, the things he has shown us are listed in verse 20. His invisible qualities, eternal power, and divine nature. Now, in other translations, the term Godhead will be used instead of divine nature. And it just means divinity. So we have his eternal power on one side and his divine nature on the other. And these are revealed through creation, right? I can know these things about God. The phrase eternal power has to do with ability. It comes from the Greek word didymus, right? It simply means ability. What God is able to do is revealed through what he has done, right? So what God has the ability to do is revealed through what he has done. He has created time, space, energy. He has created time, space, matter, energy, etc. It also tells us how long he's been able to do it. Eternal power, eternally, unending. He has always been able to do it, right? And this is what sets God apart from most pagan deities, right? God doesn't have a beginning, nor is he the God of any specific thing, right? Most pagan deities have a beginning and an end, right? And the gods of the Greek and Roman pantheon often had specific duties, like the god of war or the goddess of beauty, right? Through what God can do, we see who he is. And the other thing we get is his divine nature. This, in the context of what Paul is talking about, is the Jewish context of a monotheistic deity. It's an all-powerful, eternal, timeless, holy, personal, moral God. And you can learn all this about God by looking at the world around you without the Bible and without religious indoctrination. We're going to take what Scripture says about creation, declaring God's glory, set down the Bible, and we're going to look at creation without it. We're also going to look at creation without science as well. Remember, Abraham had neither the Bible nor science. What could he know about God, right? What can a man living in the nether reaches of Africa know about God? The questions we'll be exploring will be from several different arguments for God's existence from creation. And these will be summaries because we don't have time for a deep, deep study of each argument. The first argument for God through creation is cosmology, or the cosmological argument. This argument has 3 points. The first point is that things have a beginning. There are things that have a beginning, have a cause. If something starts, something started it. The second point is that the universe has a beginning. The third point is that the universe has a cause, and the cause is God. Right? The universe had to have a cause that was greater than itself. The universe didn't make itself, right? Nothing makes itself. Most people hear this argument and they're willing to believe that there is a God, right? It just seems like common sense. However, some people may ask, why can't it just go on forever in the past, right? Why couldn't creation just have always existed? And this gives us a problem because this gives us a problem. And the problem is infinity, the concept of infinity. We can deal with the concept of infinity without modern science. Some people believe the universe is infinite. It's always been here, so it never had a beginning, and this means it doesn't need a cause, right? It doesn't need a creator. It's just been here. And there's a problem with this because infinity is not a number. It's a concept. You can't have infinity apples because apples are specific things, right? No matter what you have a specific number of apples. Infinity doesn't exist in the numerical world because it's both impossible and impassable. And here are just a few examples to explain this. If you had infinity and you subtracted infinity from it, how much do you have now, right? Do you have infinity or do you have zero, right? If you have infinity numbers and you take out all the even numbers, what do you have now? 2 threads of infinity numbers, infinity evens, and infinity odds. As a matter of fact, are infinity numbers even or odd? And if you add one more number to infinity, is it infinity plus 1? Right? It just doesn't make sense because infinity is not a number. If the universe is infinitely old, how many moments have there been before this moment? Well, there have been infinite moments, right? And how do you get to the end of infinite moments? You don't, right? If there were infinite moments before now represents the end of infinity, and that doesn't make sense, right? Just the fact that there's a now means there was a beginning. So in order to kick all this off, we need a creator, right? And we need a creator who exists apart from time, a creator who makes and then starts time. He has to exist outside of moments because he has to start time or else it won't begin, right? You have to have a timeless creator, a beginningless beginner, an uncaused cause. And there are several different cosmological arguments that relate to the same issue. The main point is it's obvious there's a God because there's an us. Someone had to start all of this. And some people may concede and say, okay, you have the universe, you have a universe maker, you have a God, but why does it have to be the Christian God, right? Why can't it be Allah or Thor or Zeus or or Shiva, right? Because the Christian God just makes sense, right? He is capable of making the universe. All we get really is to be pushed into the doctrine of God as we ask, what that's not the universe could make the universe? The universe is matter, space, time, energy, etc. Whatever made us would have to be different than this, right? If the thing that made us had matter, space, time, energy, etc., it would have to have had a beginning. So now we need another beginner and another beginning. And that doesn't make sense because then we come back to the concept of infinity. You need a stopping point or you need a starting point. Therefore, we need a transcendent creator or supernatural cause. And yes, it has to be supernatural because it's not of nature, but it made nature, right? It's supernatural. That's what it means to be supernatural. I mean, you use the term supernatural and people start thinking about, the Marvel universe, or they start thinking about witchcraft. They start thinking about things that really don't even relate to the definition of supernatural. So I saw an interview with Anthony Flew, a British philosopher and a famous atheist in the 20th century, probably the most notable atheist of that time. And he wrote books, did interviews, debates all about attacking God. In 2004, however, he became a theist. He became a believer in God. Now, not the Christian God, but just in God. And the reason for this is because of biological micromachines, right? He saw these biological machine discoveries and concluded that there must be a God. Later on in his career, he was interviewed by Lee Strobel, and Lee is asking him various questions, right? One of them was, so you believe there's a creator of some kind? And he replies, yes, I do. There has to be. Then he asks more questions like, well, what can we know about this creator? And Flew replies, he must be incredibly intelligent. Look at what he made. He uses common sense. Once you realize there's a cause for the universe, you start to ask what could have caused it, right? Lee then asks, do you think this creator is omnipotent? Flew replies, well, you have to ascribe omnipotence if it's going to do anything. Imagine if the entire universe is a thumbtack, right? How much power do you have to make a thumbtack out of nothing? Go ahead and try, right? Just try to make an atom out of nothing, just one atom, go for it, right? You would have to have power beyond anything we can conceive to create the universe. He was then asked about the concept of being eternal. Would this being be eternal? He answered, yes, it seems like it would have to be. Now, the problem is if you don't have an eternal being or a being existing outside of time, then you have a creator for that being because it's stuck in time and it must have a beginning. And this applies a principle referred to as Occam's razor. It's a philosophical idea that states you don't need to multiply causes without necessity. So for instance, you're walking down the street, you see a banana peel on the ground. Do you assume one person left it there or 300 people left it there, right? Why wouldn't you choose or assume the obvious and believe that one person put it there, right? You don't assume multiple causes if one cause is sufficient, right? You say one cause and it's eternal. He then asked, is this cause personal? And Flew replies, I think he's going to be conscious if he's going to do anything. And I love the practicality of that statement. Now, if you combine intelligence with the will to choose to do things, you have personhood. So now we have a personal, eternal, intelligent, omnipotent creator who's timeless, changeless, and immaterial. And the next question is, can this creator interact with us? Well, he made us, so this would imply some type of interaction with the creation, or we would not have come into being. So once again, it's really just common sense. And most people would agree, and even atheists believe, that we are hardwired to believe in God. So who created this hardwiring, right? Where did this hardwiring come from? If there is a necessity, an innate necessity in us to believe in God, where did it come from, right? We didn't put it there. So what does modern science say? Let's assume you don't live in a remote part of the world, right? Let's assume you live where I do in Kansas. Modern science has supported this with the second law of thermodynamics, right? This states that everything is wearing down or getting colder. The universe is running out of usable energy. The Big Bang produced enough energy to sustain everything for millions of years, but now the energy is dissipating and the universe is cooling off. And eventually, our universe will die a heat death, right? It will just run out of energy and heat, and everything will go cold. If modern science has proved that the universe is slowly dying, then it had a beginning, right? If it's winding down, then it had a winding up, right? And this was a topic of heated debate in the 20th century among scientists and philosophers, because if the universe had a beginning, then it stands to reason that it had a creator. And this sparked a flurry of alternate theories, such as oscillating theory, the baby universe theory, string theory. There's plenty out there. However, Edwin Hubble made a discovery in 1929 that he called the redshift, or Hubble's law. He was able to determine that everything in the universe was slowly moving away from us and that its temperature wasn't at 0 degrees. It was a little above zero because of residual heat. And this, combined with Einstein's equations, proved that the universe is expanding and getting cooler, right? That means at one time, it was condensed and hot. And this led scientists to believe that there was a moment when the universe came into being suddenly and explosively, right? We're now living after that, right? The universe had a beginning, an actual beginning. Not that it was forever a dot and then became the universe, right? There was never a dot, right? There was never a string. Now, the Bible, of course, predicts this. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It also teaches that God made it out of nothing, right? And this is unlike other religions and beliefs, right? For example, in Mormonism, we have the universe existing before God was even God. So let's move on. Now we have the teleological argument, or the argument of intelligent design. And this argument is about the appearance of design throughout the universe, or specified complexity, right? It was purposefully organized and structured. And I think we can agree that if something was designed, then there's probably a designer, right? That would seem to be logical, right? You often hear people ask, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, first you actually need a rooster, but then you need a planet, oxygen, water, sun, food, and the proper temperature. Without any of these things, it doesn't matter, right? It all seems to be organized and structured in a way that all these components can come together to create the rooster and the chicken, who can then produce the egg, right? The world is a complex mixture of the necessary systems to maintain life. So is it really all just coincidence that rain is basically water from the earth recycled through the clouds, or that trees exhale oxygen for us to breathe and we exhale carbon dioxide for them to breathe? Is it really all just a coincidence, right? Modern science has actually showed us that there's more design in us than we previously thought, right? More, not less. We no longer live in times where the brain was thought to be as a heater, or the heart was just a heat pump, right? We now understand that the human body is radically complex, right? The human brain itself is wildly complex, right? We can't create computers or systems that can even do a fraction of what the human brain does, right? We can build a computer that can play chess, but can it make up its own funny jokes, right? Like, I have an Alexa, and an Alexa can tell me jokes, but she didn't make those jokes up, right? She was programmed with those jokes, and half the time, they're not even funny. And that's not Alexa's fault, because I've heard plenty of jokes from actual people that aren't funny, right? But can it play sports? Can it write a novel with the imagination of Stephen King, right? Or create a painting with the depth of Van Gogh? So we are amazingly complex. However, modern science has also shown us that we have a vital interdependence for life, right? There's the crucial nature of interdependence with our planet and our life system, right? For example, algae. Something as simple and as unextraordinary as algae is extremely important in the circle of life, right? Algae is the main driver of photosynthesis. It provides us with nearly half of our oxygen output, and it can be hypothesized that it protects the ocean from the sun's radiation because it absorbs the radiation and photosynthesizes it into sugars. And that's just algae, right? And, and that's the thing that everybody sees in the ocean, and they're like, ooh, yuck, don't touch it. It's gross, right? It's gross, it's icky. And yet, look at the incredible thing that it does. Physicists have shown the incredible precision of forces that control the universe, such as weak nuclear force and gravity. If any of these systems deviated from their current strengths at such an imperceptibly small percentage, for instance, like 0.05 of a part to 1 billion, we would not be here, or we would die, right? We'd suffer some horribly cataclysmic event, right? They're discovering more each year. It's not a coincidence that the food we eat grows on trees, bushes, and the ground, right? And the Bible also declares that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, right? God designed the universe and structured its laws, right? It does not preach an accidental or coincidental universe, right? The design argument, no matter how you approach it, is a wonderful argument for the existence of God. So next we have the axiological argument, or the moral argument. I'm going to argue that because there are moral values, there is a God, right? Not the other way around. Moral values and duties are real, and you know it, right? If someone claims that they aren't, slap them in the face and see how they respond, right? Because it's wrong to hit someone, and we all know it. It's wrong to steal. It's wrong to murder. It's wrong to lie. It's wrong to cheat. And we all know it, right? And we consider it a neurological or behavioral disorder when someone does something wrong and they don't feel bad about it, right? We have terms like, psychopathy and sociopathy and, dissociative disorder, right? It's wrong to do some things and it's right to do some things. And we know it, right? Morals are real. And God is a source of morality because he's the only justifiable source for morals and duties, right? I can't think of another source to ground them in, right? Who else in this world or in history or even in our society now is so perfect that they can dictate what's right and wrong, right? I just can't think of another source, right, to ground them in, right? To say they're objectively true, right? To say they're true whether or not anyone believes in them, right? So if the Nazis had succeeded in taking over the world, killing everyone, and brainwashing the people left into thinking it was totally okay to murder everyone who wasn't German, would that make it okay? Well, no, and we know that's not true. As a matter of fact, at the end of World War II, as Russia was preparing to invade Poland, Heinrich Himmler ordered the evacuation and destruction of Auschwitz because he knew what he had orchestrated was evil. He knew that once the Allied forces discovered what was happening in the concentration camps, that he had no hope for salvation, right? He knew he would be arrested and tried for war crimes. He knew he wouldn't be able to just say, Hitler made me do it, or I was just following orders, right? He knew it was wrong. He knew genocide and mass murder was wrong. Why? Objective moral values. And where does this objective perspective come from when all of humanity agrees that something is wrong, right? It comes from God. If there was no God, there wouldn't be morals. I mean, our basic laws in this society come from the 10 Commandments, right? Most things that you can be prosecuted for in a court of law had their beginning in the 10 Commandments. We couldn't say that things you do, we couldn't say that thing that you did was right without objective moral values. It would just be the thing that you did, right? We couldn't say that the thing that you did was wrong. It would just be the thing that you did. So we have a sense of right and wrong, and that proves there is a moral God. And the skeptic only has a few ways out of this, right? They can say there is no right or wrong, and most of us would agree that they're wrong, right? Or they'll play tricks with the word objective, right? They'll say something like, well, I have my moral objectives and you have yours. However, if I have mine and you have yours, then it becomes subjective, right? Moral values have become subject to what you believe, and that's wrong. And that kind of reasoning would make murder and rape acceptable because the murderer and the rapist felt like what they were doing was right. Now, of course, modern science doesn't contribute much to objective moral values because they're not quantifiable, right? There's no scientific test for morals. And that's why law enforcement institutions like the FBI have behavioral sciences units, right? They're desperately trying to discover why people like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer did what they did, right? Why do serial killers and other psychopaths behave the way they do? So we have general moral values that we share as humans, and this will be more deeply explored in the second chapter of Romans, right? Paul tells us that we have moral laws written in our hearts. We don't necessarily need to read the Bible to discover what morality is. The Bible can correct our morality when we sidestep, but we don't need to discover morality through reading the scripture. It's already there. So what do we conclude from the arguments I've presented? A monotheistic moral God exists. He's transcendent, powerful, timeless, intelligent, personal, and he's morally good, right? He has to have a personal interest in us if he's morally good, right? Trees aren't morally good. A chair isn't morally good. These things are good and useful, but they're not moral, right? You have a personal, a holy, eternal, powerful creator God, and we haven't even opened the Bible to find him. And some people might call that general theism, right? They might say you don't have the God of the Bible in what we just studied, and I completely disagree, right? These characteristics I just described belong to the God of the Bible. This is how the Bible describes God. If the God I observed in creation was different from the God of the Bible, then I'd have a problem, right? As I observe creation, I'm not finding the characteristics of Buddha or Zeus or Allah or Thor or anyone else, right? And this is the philosophy we find in Romans, and this is what we see in the world around us. And I love this because the philosophy in the Bible is so true, right? Anthony Flew, who embraced theism but never became a Christian, called Christianity a first-rate philosophy. And that's a great endorsement from a man who spent 3/4 of his life as a fervent atheist, right? I love it. And this philosophy isn't new to Paul or the New Testament, right? Psalms, which was written 3,000 years ago, expounds it. Psalms 19, 1-4. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun. So Psalm 19 declares to us that creation makes it clear that there's a God and that it is understood in every language all around the world. And this is interesting because Paul spends a great amount of time arguing apologetics, and we read about that in Acts, right? He argues from common sense. He doesn't use complex theology or philosophy, right? He uses common sense. In Athens, he steps into and forgive me if I mispronounce this, the Areopagus, which is a prominent rock outcropping once used for public speaking. And he approaches them with a common sense application of there's a God and you know it. And remember, they're polytheists and idol worshippers. So Acts 17, 22-31. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I am going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands, and he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead." So he argues from what's obvious about God, right? The foolishness of idolatry, and then just starts talking about Jesus. The wrath of God has been revealed, and now salvation is revealed through Jesus and the gospel. He comes to people who believe in idols, and he appeals to common sense. When you're witnessing, I encourage you to use this, right? You don't need a degree in philosophy or to graduate from seminary to do this. We are here on this planet, in this creation. God exists, right? Of course, there are people who will be stubborn and hard of heart and will resist on these issues, right? Be patient with them, reason with them, and be gracious. But in the end, they're just suppressing a truth that they know and realize. And it's not about what man knows, but how man responds to the revelation of God that we see in creation, right? What happens to us as a result of our response because sometimes we don't respond very well, right? Let's face it, that we know there's a God, we have a motive to reject him, right? He wants and asks us to do things we don't want to do, right? He wants us to be accountable for sin. He wants us to repent and turn away, right? He asks us to change our lifestyle and reject these behaviors that create sin. Verse 21, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. The problem is that they don't glorify God. They're ungodly. They practice ungodliness. Furthermore, they're ungrateful and unresponsive to the kindness that God has shown them, right? Have you even thanked God for your lungs, or just get mad when they weren't working, right? Have you ever thanked God for your life, or just got mad when it went downhill, right? The ungratefulness creates bitterness in us, and we shake our fist at a creator who has given us all things. I've listened to a lot of angry atheists and theists, right? People who proclaim that they're mad at God, but there's nothing wise in being mad at God, right? I'm scared for anyone who's mad at God. You're in serious trouble when you, the creation, are shaking your fist at the creator, right? Do people like that really believe that they're actually going to stand before God at judgment and shake their fist at him, right? Yell or chastise him for not making their life better, right? Richard Dawkins, a British evolutionary biologist and a well-known atheist, says that when he stands before God, he'll boldly ask, "Sir, why did you make yourself so hard to find?" Really, so hard to find, right? You, Richard, live in a world where most people believe in God, and then you're standing before God, who's obviously real. You're about to be judged, and you're going to blame him for your unbelief, right? I've actually heard atheists say that they'd rather go to hell than worship God. Okay, pretty sure that wish will be granted, right? They're going to find out the loving God that the Bible talks about really exists, yet still refuse to let him be loving or accept that he's loving, right? Atheists won't even look at the nobility of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, right? They mock it. They mock the idea of Jesus dying for their sins, and they mock sin itself, right? They're so darkened by hate or disappointment or betrayal that they can't even accept a sacrificial death given out of love, right? Nothing more, nothing less than love, right? And have you ever been so mad, disappointed, or betrayed by someone that they can't do anything ever again to get in your good graces? Many Christians will say that there are no atheists, right? They say that atheists believe in God, right? And I disagree with this, right? There are true atheists out there, right? They do exist. However, Romans is teaching us that there shouldn't be any atheists, right? It's not reasonable. It's irrational. But if you do reject God, your heart can become darkened and your thoughts can become futile, right? You think with futility. And this is evident in the life of Antony Flew, right? He spent decades arguing against the existence of God. And then one day, because of microorganisms, right? Those were the micro machines, microorganisms. He became a theist, right? He saw the intelligent design in creation, right? His darkened and futile thoughts were lifted, and he saw the truth. Now, he never became Christian, but he accepted that there was a God, and then he had to battle against the decades of futile thinking that defined his career and his life. So the key statement in Romans is that we ought to believe, right? We should believe. However, when we reject God by disobeying him, not being thankful, and inventing more convenient versions of him, right? Our thoughts, our lives become futile. And there really are people who believe false religions and false doctrines. So verse 22 through 23. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles. And these verses are pretty simple, right? They professed to be wise and became fools and engaged in pagan practices, worshiping pagan gods. And if you read ancient pagan writings, they thought they were really wise and philosophical, right? And everybody thinks they're wise, right? I'm no exception, right? But I'm wise by following Christ and praising the Lord. However, even those who are wrong can think they're wise, right? Thinking you're wise doesn't make you wrong, but it also doesn't make you right. And they were praising themselves because of their forward thinking, right? They're educated, they're wise. Ancient pagans, atheists, those who accept false doctrine, they all think they're wise, but they're rejecting God, right? Idolatry is the perfect evidence for this, making or buying a statue and then bowing or praying to it, right? If that's not evidence that something's wrong spiritually, I don't know what is, right? So one more interesting point. Many atheists and philosophers will argue that the universe came from nothing, or that it happened as a result of a quantum vacuum. But a quantum vacuum is something, right? It's not nothing. It has dimensions, it has space, and it has potential energy. But if they say it came from nothing, then they don't have to explain where that nothing came from, right? We all know the truth. Nothing means nothing. Nothing doesn't have qualities, yet in the minds of some philosophers, it somehow spawned the universe, right? The bottom line is that you have plenty of reasons to believe in God and believe in morality, right? Romans is going to build on this. However, there's a problem. I haven't always done what is moral, and now I know I'm in trouble. That's how the wrath of God is revealed. I know I'm a sinner. I know this without help from anyone else. I know I've done wrong, and I know there's a God. Furthermore, Paul implies that if we seek God, then we find him. If I started praying to God and asked him to make himself known and reveal himself, he would, right? Abraham attests to this in the Old Testament, right? He had no prior knowledge of God, no Old Testament, no scriptures, and yet he believed, and God responded. We should believe as well knowing, understanding, and anticipate that God will respond, because he will. Thank you for watching. I hope this video has been fruitful for you. Have a blessed day.